The Magi saw and followed his star, referring to the morning star or the planet Mars. As claimed in an earlier series, the polar configuration of Saturn, Venus, and Mars was present during the lifetime of Jesus Christ. The identification of Mars as the star that the Magi saw in the east is important. It explains the claim by the wise men that the star both moved and then stopped. The so-called Star of Bethlehem was like no other normal star. Stars, at least from the vantage point of man on earth, do not move. They do not go before, as Matthew claimed. The Greek translated as went before is proegon, from the verb proago, meaning to lead forth, go before, or precede. It not only indicates movement in time or space before others, but implies intent. The going before is leading forth or indicating the way forward. The same wording and meaning was used when Jesus led his disciples into Jerusalem just before his passion. Jesus went before his disciples after his resurrection, leading them to a meeting in Galilee. The movements of the Bethlehem star, Mars, were not random. They were purposeful. They led the Magi in a specific direction. When the planet reached the desired location, it stopped. This too was intentional. The planet did not stop moving at a random location. One commentary, Gill's exposition of the Bible, believes that the star pointed out the specific house where the child was living. The planet Mars, the Bethlehem star, was acting as a guide for the wise men. It was, in fact, acting in the role of an angel. That is, it was a heavenly messenger providing direction, literally, to man on earth. The theme of a guiding star, especially the morning star, leading men to designated locations, is found in Greco-Roman mythology. According to the Roman poet Virgil, for example, the Trojan hero Aeneas sailed to Latium guided by the morning star, in this case Venus. We learn from the Greek historian Diodorus Siculus that the Corinthian Timoleon and his fleet, like Aeneas, were led to Italy by a light in the sky, in this case a torch. The book of Exodus and other biblical accounts plainly inform that it was the Lord who brought Israel out of Egyptian bondage and then brought them to the land of Canaan. Certainly, it was the Lord who made their escape possible through his mighty power. But it was not simply a matter of effecting their escape through the destruction of the Egyptian army. Ancient Israel needed to be directed in their journey. They needed to know where to go. It was not like the epic movie The Ten Commandments, where the people followed Moses, who walked ahead and led the way. The Lord did not walk ahead of the camp, nor did he personally show the people the direction that they needed to go. Instead, he directed the camp of Israel by means of a pillar of fire at night and a pillar of a cloud during the day. The pillar of fire and the pillar of the cloud led the Israelites through their wandering in the wilderness. It led them in the way they should go. But what were these pillars? What was the pillar of fire and the pillar of the cloud? Scholars and commentators are generally at a loss as to explaining the pillar that led the Israelites through the wilderness. Current science has no physical explanation for a pillar which changes appearance, moves, and does so with purpose. Thus, commentators are resigned to invoke the miraculous and mysterious manifestation of God's power. It was Emanuel Velikovsky who came closest to the truth. He believed the pillar of smoke and fire were the result of a comet, called the Comet of Typhon, which he identified as the planet Venus. He cited Abraham Rockenbach, a 17th century professor of Greek, mathematics, and law at Frankfurt. Velikovsky was correct that the pillar was an effect of a nearby planet. However, the planet was Mars and not Venus. But first, we must describe the attributes of the pillar or pillars. The Mosaic account describes the pillars as one pillar with two different aspects. During the day it was cloudy, and during the night it had the appearance of fire. As we have noted, the pillar moved. These movements regulated the journey of Israel and acted as a guide. The pillar apparently rose from the tabernacle when it moved. The pillar was not a temporary phenomenon. It endured during the entire 40-year journey of Israel in the wilderness. The presence and glory of God were visible within the pillar. The pillar was capable of transmitting sound, most notably the voice of the Lord. The pillar provided a covering during the day and light to the camp at night. The pillar provided a defense against enemies. The cloud camouflaged the camp during the day, and the fire at night caused the enemies to fear. The pillar had the ability to widen its radius to include the entire camp or Mount Sinai, and then narrow it to cover only the tabernacle. The cloud appeared to intentionally cover the tabernacle at significant events. While a pillar with these attributes seems physically impossible, there is one explanation that can account for the pillar as described in the scriptural record. The pillar was the Axis Mundi of the polar configuration. As we have observed previously, the Axis Mundi was a plasma formation extending between Earth and Mars. The mythologies and religions of antiquity interpreted and characterized the Axis Mundi in a variety of ways. It was a mountain, tower, ladder, rope, and many other things. It was also a pillar or column, most commonly a pillar of fire. The cosmic axis inspired countless imitations throughout the ancient world. In Egypt, the polar column served as the prototype for the obelisk. The obelisk was not confined to Egypt. Ancient Assyria erected obelisk-like pillars as well. Pillars were part of ancient American religious architecture as well, like this one from Peru. Obelisk-like pillars were erected throughout the world, such as these from India and Ethiopia. The modern world continues to construct commemorative pillars to this day. The world pillar gave rise to the columns of temples and other religious shrines. The Temple of Solomon had two metal pillars, Boaz and Jachin, which stood on the porch. Joseph Smith, in building the Nauvoo Temple, followed the ancient tradition of temple columns. These columns included the explicit notion of the polar configuration. The Salt Lake Temple preserved the design elements of the Axis Mundi, including the rayed cloud at the top of the column. The pillars and columns of antiquity combine the features of the cloud and fire. The mighty angel with the rainbow upon its head in John's Apocalypse is a perfect example. During the day, due to the light of the sun, the polar configuration was subdued as if obscured by clouds. During the darkness of night, on the other hand, the configuration blazed with light and glory. But most importantly, it was a pillar or mountain of fire and light. David Talbot explains.
But there's much more to this story. The symbolism of the crescent takes on far-reaching implications with the emergence of the cosmic pillar, a form we noted only briefly in the previous segment. The pillar, linked to the movement of the planet Mars, arose with the descent of material from the red planet toward the Earth, creating a form universally interpreted not just as a pillar, but as the axial world mountain, the cosmic support and resting place of the Creator himself, the primeval Sun. A mountain of fire and light, the mountain of creation, the mountain of assembly, an axial pillar around which the heavens visually turned, all meaningless in the absence of the original referent in the sky.
The Axis pillar of the sky, the mountain of fire and light, is the pillar of fire described by Moses in his account of the Exodus. David Talbot, when discussing the formation of the world mountain or axial pillar, made several important points.
The pillar, linked to the movement of the planet Mars, arose with the descent of material from the red planet toward the Earth, creating a form universally interpreted not just as a pillar, but as the axial world mountain.
First, the pillar was linked to the movement of the planet Mars. When Mars moved down the axis towards Earth, the pillar was created. After its creation, when Mars moved in relation to Earth, so did the pillar. Second, the pillar was primarily associated with the planet Mars, and not any other planet. Third, the animation demonstrates that the pillar had a variable geometry, beginning with a very narrow touchdown point on Earth and eventually widening at its base. These attributes of the axial pillar can be directly related to the attributes of the pillar of fire of the Exodus. The scriptural accounts provide 8 specific attributes of the pillar of fire. The pillar of fire and the pillar of the cloud, or simply the cloud, were the same physical manifestation. There was only one pillar. There was only one axis pillar and world mountain. It appeared subdued during the day and alive with fire during the night. The pillar of fire moved. So did the axis pillar of the sky, which was tied to the movement of Mars in relation to Earth. The pillar of fire was an enduring phenomenon, lasting the entire 40 years of Israel's journey in the wilderness. The axial pillar was an integral and long-lasting element of the polar configuration. The radius of the base of the pillar of fire varied, at times widening and at other times narrowing. The axis pillar formed with a narrow base and later widened. The narrowing and widening of the base of the axis pillar occurred throughout its presence in the polar configuration. The base of the pillar of fire and of the cloud was large enough to encompass the entire camp of Israel, providing cover and camouflage during the day and light and deterrence during the night. The axis pillar was a tremendous formation extending to the heavens, physically reaching the planet Mars above the Earth. It had a very large base at times, which could envelop the camp of Israel and much more. The pillar of fire was described as transmitting sound, the voice of the Lord in particular. The axis pillar was a plasma formation. Plasma is a transducer capable of converting electrical energy into acoustic energy. According to the scriptural accounts, the glory and presence of God were visible within the pillar. This final attribute of the pillar of fire is complex and requires further examination.